Just by way of starting our session today, hey Siri, I want to ask a question to you rather than Siri. In fact, I want to ask a question to the men. And so hands up if you have ever been asked the question or the type of question which revolves around, does this dress make me look fat? Now hands up if you would put your hand up, but because of the people in proximity around you, keep your hand up if you didn't realize that there was only ever one answer to that question. I was yep. I was told by my dad when I was younger that there was only one answer to that question, and that answer wasn't, no darling, but the cake you ate last night does. Apparently that's not the answer to that question. If you ask Siri though, the question is answered, and this is the answer that every person should give if you're ever asked that question. So I asked Siri, hey Siri, does this dress make me look fat? And this is what you're supposed to answer. It's supposed to say, to me, you're perfect. Is that right? Is that the right answer? I feel like I need to explain that I wasn't wearing a dress at that point. And so whether that had an influence over what happened with that, I don't know. But today we're asking a question as part of this series, Hey Siri, how do I unsay something that I've said? And already we've discovered that there are some men in the room who really need to find out the answer to this question and fast. Because apparently statistically, with that question that we've just asked, 100% of men only ever get that wrong once. How do I unsay something that I've said? And this series has been about asking questions, big questions, questions that perhaps aren't easy just to find the answer to with Ask Siri or Hey Alexa or whatever it is. And I've just set off about 7 phones, which is probably the favorite part of speaking at this series. And so in week 1, we asked the question, what do we do when life sucks or stinks? And what we realized is the hard tasks of life can often lay the foundation, the fertile soil where our faith can grow tomorrow. The next week we asked, why is it, Siri, hey, why is it that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth? And we looked at this idea of conflict, and when it comes to conflict particularly, a principle in which we're supposed to take on and take on and take on, and it's an important principle that we're gonna look at again sort of today, is this saying, be quick to listen and slow to speak. Everyone say that, quick to listen and slow to speak. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Quick to listen, slow to speak. And then last week, we looked at those people who perhaps are on our radar, but we don't really want to spend time with them. They're the people we try and distance ourselves from. And the principle we looked at is, hey, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you're someone of faith, you are supposed to be extending that same love in which Jesus gave to you, and we're supposed to be expanding this thing called the moral circle. And so if that interests you, check out last week and check out online, and all of these episodes online, forwardchurch.com. So this week we're asking this question, how do I unsay something that I have said? We all say things, don't we? We all say things in which we just wish we could take back. One of my favorite stories around this was my friend Stuart at high school. We're in about year 8, and the reason I love this story is because everyone's got a story like it. And we were in a room with like the strictest teacher, and so like the teacher was giving instruction and the rest of it, and we were in a computer room going through some stuff on the computer, and Stuart wasn't listening, and so Stuart just goes, Mum, what are we supposed to do? And we all looked and thought, this is not getting old soon. And it didn't get old soon until one of the rest of us did it as well. And we realized that this was a mistake we all made. And you could see the look in his face. How do I unsay that? How do I get around the fact that I just called my teacher Mum? And it was awkward and it was weird. I can remember other times as well where I've said something which I've just looked back on and just think, why on earth did I say that? I was working at a residential center for young people and children. Schools would take children. They would have a week of outdoor activities. And on the first evening, I was told by the leader of this residential, listen, just be careful, just be on your best behavior, only because there's the head teacher here this week and a few of the governors, they just want to check us out, see what we're doing, and so we just want to give a really good impression. And so I was on my best behavior, and I realized that I was actually, just because it was quite a large school, I was sharing a room with one of the head governors. And I was like, whoever made this decision, this is all on them now. And so I was doing my best behavior, don't say anything out of line, don't say anything in line. And on the last night we were there, and I think it was probably just because I was on the phone to my mum beforehand or whatever it is, just as we were turning out the light, the governess went, good night, Johnny. And I went, night, love you. And the worst thing is he didn't say it back. How do I unsay something that I've said? Words are incredibly powerful. They have all these, they can bring emotion, they can bring success, they can bring devastation. And it turns out when it comes to the words that we use, we all have a set of buttons we might be familiar with. These are the buttons that we have when it comes to the things we say. We all have a pause button, don't we? When we're saying something and maybe we're approaching a difficult subject, maybe around politics or theology or whatever it is, or family or those things that we're like, oh, am I allowed to approach on this or whatever it is? And we just maybe think, maybe I should pause before I say this and really be careful with the words I use. Maybe it's the stop button that we're good at using or need to be good at using, where we're going somewhere and we realize that we are just already over the line, like the line is a dot or whatever it is, and we just think, I need to stop where I'm going right now and just hold back. I just don't want to say any more. The button we're best at using though, aren't we? It's definitely the play button. It's the play button where we just click play and we just go and go and go and go and go until it's probably too late to use the pause button and too late to press the stop button. And so because of that, the button in which we really all actually want is this button, the rewind button. The rewind button, but the problem with that is that it just doesn't exist. When we say things that we don't mean, when we say things that are just too wrong or too out of order, it is just too late and there is no way of being able to bring those things back. The fire's been set. We have already gone wrong. Words are incredibly powerful. They can bring you success. They can bring you demise. They can do well in your career. They can make your family the best it can be. It can set your children on the right path, or it can mess everything up. And part of the reason in why words are so powerful is because they're not equally weighted. The words we speak are never, ever, ever, ever equal in weight. And you know this. You know this because when you say something or have said something you regret, it doesn't matter how many times or how many words you try and use in order to try and bring back the damage. The damage has already been done. I mean, we say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Like, why is it that you're just not better now? Like, why doesn't that just make things better? Why? Because the words we speak are never equal in weight. What makes it worse is that the words in which can often have a negative impact tend to be far heavier, aren't they? Far heavier than the words that can bring good things. I mean, most of you, you'll know this, particularly if you've got parents or have a difficult relationship with your parents, you'll be able to remember the sarcasm. You'll be able to remember those snide comments or the difficult comments. And you might even be able to remember a time where a parent sat you down and they said, listen, what I'm about to tell you is really, really, really important. I'm about to tell you something really important. And you can't remember what they said, but you can remember it was really important. Why? Because the words that carry the most weight tend to be the words in which we regret the most. Not only is it the words don't carry equal weight, but the people who share those words carry different weight as well. And I'm not talking about physically. I mean, think about it. And me right now speaking, I will carry more weight in the words that I say than if I was standing down here chatting to you after the service with a coffee. I mean, there's a matter of position which gives you more weight. If you're a boss, you will carry more weight to a bunch of employees than a fellow employee. This is definitely important if you're a parent. I'm sure of it. In fact, everything we say. So an example of this is when I started doing church work, when I started to think, hey, maybe this is something I want to do and something that's on my heart and it's something that I guess would be good and something I think I could be good at and everything else. And so I started to explore it and learn it and everything else. And I quickly realized that one of the areas within this that doesn't come all that naturally is pastoral work. And the part of the reason why I found it difficult is I've always cringed a little bit at those sort of comments you get over counseling or whatever it is. And it's like, so tell me about the relationship with your father. And I always just thought that all pastoral work was that, like, tell me about the relationship with your father. And so I started, meeting with people and trying to work this thing out and getting help and training and the rest of it. And I found time and time and time again, I'd meet up with people and they'd be sharing the issue. I'd be saying, hey, what's going wrong or what's going up? And, they would talk and out of nowhere, all of a sudden they'd be talking about, and then with my dad and this happened and when I was young, this. And so I'd be sitting there and I'd be like, so tell me about the relationship with your father. And it became so apparent that the weight of words that parents give to children are just so heavy. When you look at the array of insecurities in this room, it does not matter how many words I try and tell you or say to try and get you away from that insecurity, because my words will never weigh the same as the parent's voice, particularly the father's voice that goes into your life, or perhaps the lack of a father's voice into your life. People don't share weight in the words that they say. The other thing in which words don't hold equal weight in is the recovery time. Why is it that when we say something that is sharp and hurtful, why is it not just the case that we can just say, I'm sorry, why aren't you better? Why isn't it so simple? Why is it that we say something, it hurts immediately. Immediately it cuts deep, and it can take time and time and time. It doesn't take the same amount of time to get better as it did to get hurt. It's never that simple. It's like me with a hammer. If I got someone's hand and hit them and went, sorry, it's an accident. That doesn't make us equal anymore. Why is it that there isn't such thing as a rewind button on life that we can just press, and we can press it and all of a sudden think we are equal with the people that we have been speaking to? How do I unsay something that I wish I never said? Enter this man called James. We've been looking at this ancient document over the past few weeks, and we'll look at it in the last of our series next week as well, where we ask the question to this man called James. James was a really significant person in the New Testament after Jesus' life, because James was Jesus' brother. If you're someone not of faith, or if you've got friends who aren't of faith and they're asking about the Bible and they're saying, well, maybe I'll give it a read, but I'm not sure where to start, there's worse places to start than James. It's incredibly practical and incredibly helpful in that respect, and incredibly approachable as well, and fairly easy to understand on the most part. But James wrote this ancient document, and he was incredibly wise and gave us some ideas on how to tackle these big questions. And so when it hits chapter 3, which is where we're at the moment, so we're going straight into the middle of the book. If you want to see what it says previously, you can either read it at home or online or whatever it is, or check us out, forgechurch.com, and look at the other episodes. When we start chapter 3, James says something that 100% of us in this room will agree with. In fact, even if you read the Bible and think, I'm not sure if I believe the Bible, I'm not sure if the Bible is right, you will agree with this part. This is what James chapter 3 says. We all stumble in many ways. Hands up if we all stumble in many ways. Now I can see the liars in the room, and I can also see the people who are like, yep. We all stumble in many ways. We all say things that we don't want to say, but then James says something profound and brilliant. He says this: anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect and able to keep their whole body in check. I mean, imagine this for a moment. It's a bit of a gross thought, but imagine you could get a tongue. And I mean, it's ugly and it's weird. It's a small part of the body. But if you could control that part, if you could control what comes out of your mouth, you would be, James says, perfect in every way. You would have the capacity and the control to be able to direct the rest of your life. Think about all of the successes in your life. How much of that came down to being able to say the right thing? It turns out that there is not many things that are more powerful than being able to communicate with clarity. That's ironic, isn't it? Communicate with clarity. If you can sort out what your tongue says, what your mouth says James, your life is gonna look a whole lot better than it does at the moment. And we're like, yeah, James, we get it. We get it. We know that. That is true. We can agree with that part. What's next? Like, what are we supposed to do? And James says, no. Like, I want to give you some analogies. And so James says this: when we put bits in the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. And maybe you're someone who likes riding horses or have been around horses growing up, and you'll know this and you've done this. I always get nervous when I'm driving and find horses on the road, and as I'm riding, and partly because there's some that are near where I live, and as I'm driving, often they're giving horse riding lessons to like crazy small people. And I'm looking and I'm like, the size of that horse does not correlate with the size of the child on the horse. That just doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel okay. But the way they've trained the horse is by putting bits in its mouth to show the direction of the horse. And what this is saying, and again and again and again, it's reminding us, if you can control the mouth, you can control the direction of the largest being. And maybe in your life right now, you are not going in the direction in which you want to be going, and maybe you haven't considered, maybe it's something to do with what's coming out of my mouth, and I don't know how to use my pause button or stop button, and I really wish I had a rewind button. Or take ships as an example, James says. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants to go. Now, ships in this time was probably one of the biggest things that people could imagine. I mean, don't think of the big cruise ships we have today. These were like first, second century ships. Ships which would transport people, transport goods. They were going to find new bits of the world and everything else. And what James is saying is like, imagine how big that's probably the biggest thing you can imagine. The biggest thing you can imagine. And how is it steered? How does it navigate the winds of the Galilean Sea that push it around all the time? It's with a rudder. I mean, it's something small. It's something so small that controls the whole bit. And people are thinking, yeah, James, okay, we get it. We get it now. Like, words are important. Words are significant. Words hold power. And they're used to control us. I mean, that's the whole thing. Like the things within our mouth control our whole body, our whole being. We get it. What's it saying? James is like, no. You don't get it yet. This is what he then says. He says, likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. For these people, a forest fire would have been something that would perhaps been more difficult to understand, but we're going to see a video now, and you'd have seen videos previously of forest fires. And when you see it, it's tremendous, like the power of being able to rip through whole forests, all starting with a spark. And think about the words in which we say. How often they can just be a spark which just goes into thing, which goes into thing, which goes into thing. And before we know it, there are a whole bunch of badly burnt situations, burnt people, hurt situations, all because of the spark we let loose with our tongues. All because of the spark we let loose because of our tongues. Imagine for a moment that I had some haystacks on this side of the stage. And over here I had a box of matches and I lit a match. How close do I need to get towards the haystack with a lit match before you start getting nervous? Because you know the potential in the match is greater than the match itself. And the amount of water that would be required to try and put out the haystack, out the fire, before it starts causing serious damage would far outweigh the capacity of the match. It's exactly the same with our voice, and James says it. The tongue is also a fire. It's also a fire. It might be a small fire, but fire spreads. And it's like, even once we set that fire into motion, the amount of healing, the amount of words in return it takes to pour over the fire is just so disproportionate. And then by then, the damage has already been done. A word full of evil among parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body. Think about it. Nobody ever sends a mouth to sit on the naughty step. They send the whole child. Nobody ever divorces from a mouth. They divorce the whole person. Nobody ever fires a mouth or employs a mouth. They employ the whole person. Why? Because it's this part of your body that sets the whole of your life on fire if it's not used right, and itself set on fire by hell. James doesn't mince his words. There is something within you, something inside of you that is dangerous and has extraordinary potential. So people are thinking, okay, James, we get it. Tongue is powerful, mouth is powerful, what we say is important. It's like a horse, it can direct us in the right direction. It's like a boat, it can guide us through heavy storms and everything else. It's like a fire, we've got to be really careful because the potential of damage is really, really big. There's something inside of us, we've got to be really, what do we do, James? And James says, no. Still haven't got it. James then goes on to say this: all the kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. And maybe this will pull thoughts back to the beginning of the world or the story that had been told about creation. And this idea that before anything there was nothing. What did Jesus do? What did God do when he spoke into the world? He spoke and stuff appeared. He spoke and animals appeared. And then what was the first thing he commanded? He spoke to Adam. Rule over and subdue the animals. And so Adam did. He sat down and he named them, and he was like Venezuelan fruit bat and, tarantula and all these creative ones. And at the end, he was like rat, dog, cat. And so he named all of the different animals and he subdued them. I have a friend called Ken who has one of the nicest dogs I know, a dog called Bella. And I was around his house recently and I was like, how do you train this dog to make it so lovely and great and doesn't bark at you or get in your space, but it's just really pleasant, really lovely dog. And he just said, we were really intentional when it was small to direct it in the right way. And so we would eat our food first and then feed the dog that's food, and that way it knows its place. We'd never let it on the sofas. When we went out for walks, I would go and I'd stand by the road and I would say stay, and if it pulled on the lead or if it tried to get away, we would then go back to the house and we'd try again later. And there was all of this effort going into making this dog realize how it was supposed to behave as the dog and as part of this family. Training a dog, it's almost like there's a science to it. There's a nature to it. There's things that you can do, but when it comes to the tongue, this is the bad news. James says you have no hope. There is no way of being able to control the tongue in the way that the tongue needs to be controlled if you are going to be perfect. It's restless evil, full of deadly poison. I mean, on this thing, there needs to be like a warning label. Think about the power that I hold right now with just this microphone on. I could ruin my career. I could ruin a lot of this church or break apart some of this church. I could offend people in this room and people outside of this room. I could put a bad reputation onto the forge that could be really difficult to reclaim just because of this microphone. And then next week, Steve or one of the elders might come up onto the stage and be like, so you remember Jonny? He's not coming back. He says he's really, 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 really sorry, but he still ain't coming back. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. James is saying, be careful of what you say, be careful of what you say, be careful of what you say. And the people listening right now are thinking, okay, like, tell us, James. And James is like, still not yet. With a tongue we praise our Lord and Father, he continues. With a tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we can curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth comes praising and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. And he gives another analogy. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or grape bear figs? Neither can salt springs produce fresh water. And we know that. Maybe you're here and you're singing, God, you're great. God, send victory, everything else, and victory, and thinking of the England rugby team at the moment. Victory. God, you're so great, you're so good, you're so great. And then you get into the car or you get home, and then all of a sudden the words coming out of your mouth to either spouses or children or friends or via email to different work colleagues just looks completely different. And James is saying, your tongue, your mouth is so interesting. It's so unique in that capacity. It is so powerful, and you just do not understand how powerful this is. And people are saying, okay, James, we get it now. We get it. Tongue is powerful. Your voice is unique. Your voice has all sorts of potential. If you get it right, you can guide big things with it. If you can get it right, you can control the storms of life. If you get this right, now we get that you can avoid setting things on fire. We get that it's impossible to control it whilst it's possible to control animals. So if we can't control it, and if it's so important, James, what are we supposed to do? And then James says, the end. Seriously, you read it and it says all of these amazing things and we're waiting for this big bit of application, and James just says, the end. And I think it's almost on purpose, because I don't think there is a golden bullet to what we say and how we speak. I think it's more like when you go to the gym. If you go to the gym, which I obviously don't, if you go to the gym and you go in and you sort of knock on the shoulder, tap the shoulder of the strongest or fittest person that you can find in that gym. And you can say, well, listen, you've obviously been here a long time. You're obviously really good at what you do. You're obviously really committed. You're obviously really good shape. When are you done? I mean, like, when are you going to stop and just eat carbs like the rest of us? Like, when are you finished? The person will look and be like, well, I have no plans to. If I'm going to be strong, if I'm going to get this right, then I just have to keep on going. And so what's the principle we need to learn? Well, it comes back from 2 weeks ago. This is why 2 weeks ago was so important. James 1, verse 19, James has already said it. He says this, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak. 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 There's no golden bullet. What I've done, though, is try to give us 3 ways in which we can try and improve it. 3 ways in which we can try and step forward a little bit and trying to control this thing called the tongue. It won't solve it, but it might help. Number 1, really simple. Talk, don't text. Talk, don't text. If there is something so important in your life, give it the honor. Give it the honor of showing your face to the conversation. I've had numerous conversations, even in the last few weeks, which go along the lines of, if you're texting and arguing over text or via email or a messenger on Snapchat or Instagram or whatever it is, no argument I have ever heard of has been solved by text. Nobody has ever gone away satisfied arguing over text. If something is important, don't tweet about it or Facebook about it unless you're willing to show a face to it. Talk, don't text. Number 2, break the cycle. Some of you may say things maybe to a spouse or to siblings and you think, where on earth did that come from? And you know exactly where it came from. You know where it came from because your parent told you about it or said it to you, or someone once said it to you, or you heard someone say it to someone else, and you know exactly where that's come from, and it's just come out of your mouth and it's there and it's done. Break the cycle, be the person, and you know these words. Some of you here will know the words that I'm talking about where you know, I often say that and I don't mean to say that and I hate that I say that because someone said it to me. Be the person to break the cycle so they then don't go on to say it to others. Number 3, honor your spouse, honor your child, honor your boss, honor your employees, honor your friends, honor your church. The thing about honoring words is they take far more intentionality than dishonoring words. Far more intentionality than dishonoring words. Talk, don't text, break the cycle, honor. I was reading a book recently which had a phenomenal quote in it that I thought was really helpful. Some of it's a bit wordy at the beginning, but there's a quote within it that I think is so powerful. It comes from a guy called Viktor Frankl who was caught in a concentration camp in Germany for several years. In fact, he went to a numerous amount of concentration camps within Germany. And after his time there, he wrote a book presenting a theory on how man can find meaning in the most desperate, dark situations. And this is what he says as part of this theory. I think it's fantastic. I never tire of saying that the only real changeable aspects of life are the potentialities. But as soon as they are actualized, as soon as they come out of your mouth, they are rendered realities. And in that very moment, they are saved and delivered into the past when they cannot be rescued, and they are preserved from changing. For in the past, nothing is irretrievably lost, but everything is irrevocably stored. And then he says this, I think this is brilliant. Remember this. At any moment, man must decide, for better or for worse, what will be the monument of his existence. Every time you speak, you set out a monument for your existence. Every time you open your mouth, you set out a monument for other people to see and read. What will be the monument of your existence? 2 takeaways, 2 questions to ask yourself as we finish. When it comes to the words that you say, where do I have work to do? Where do I have work to do? What situation? What place? What person? What area of gossip? What area of slander? What part of sarcasm? What phrase do I use over and over again? Where do I have work to do? And number 2, who hopes I get work done soon? For whose sake, for whose future, for which child, for which person, for which man, for which woman is gonna benefit from you putting in the hard work of a constant gym-like graft in order that you may be right with the words that come out of your mouth. Let me pray as we go into our final song. Shall we stand? Lord, we all have extraordinary power. You've given us a gift that has extraordinary capabilities and potential. Potential that if we use rightly can expand the world. And Lord, I'm convinced that there are a few things that you've given us that have as much power and destroying capabilities as well as building up capabilities than our tongue. Lord, we know people who are full of confidence who perhaps weren't, but the words spoken over them have built them up. And Father, on the reverse of that, we know people who were once so confident and the words that were spoken over them and into them has broken them down. And we want to be people who reflect you. We want to be people who recognize this and do the hard graft more than anybody else in order to break cycles, in order to do conflict well, in order to heal, not harm. We want to be people who speak well in the way that you spoke things into existence with such purity and such goodness. May we be people